Same committee, different meeting. Thanks for being here. I got told about the doctor. No, that's cool.
Thanks, Dee.
Because I called you late, you stayed up.
No, I finally jumped out of the waiting room and I said, you know what, I have something I'm gonna do. And he came right in.
I mean, I think we needed to set this thing last night when you had food influence to keep the community council there at that school. They didn't have a permit, you just got right in there and made sure they could run it.
That's like philosophy, you know what I mean?
Did great. For the community council last night, the agenda for one of the chief. You have enjoyed this. Lots of cheers up here.
Yeah, on this side.
Name tag,
Yeah.
so we ignore the name.
Ignore the name.
I'm gonna remove it, okay.
Thank you.
Liz, I think Amy is not gonna be here, so we can shut that off.
Okay. Oh, yeah, Pam's calling in.
This time it worked pretty well.
Alaska Community Action on Toxics. And
Did you get the work stuff for tonight?
Is that enough?
Well, if we can do things, I don't want to hold things up, but,
You're awesome.
inside door doesn't work on the driver's side. It doesn't open the door, and I'm full of space, so the shoe inside the panel, so we have to stand out there waiting for
Yeah. So we're ready to share.
It'll be on the 11th of April.
Just turn it down a little bit. I can go away. So there's actually a recording that happens right here. So it's just that, which is okay. But sometimes we have people talking like privately. It'll be recorded. Okay.
Good to know.
Please, yeah. I'd like to be able to get in that.
I'll go outside.
Corey, I know it'll be late, what time do you guys usually close?
Are you online now? Pamela?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Lisa, can you shut the projector off? Because maybe nothing going on there. It's gonna blind some people. Bounce back from my head, it'll be blind. Thank you, man.
You're welcome.
Do you work Saturday? Please get it done.
So the person scheduled this morning in for the hearing?
You know, it's been that way. There's some issues getting rid of.
I'd rather come back.
I think it was the last meeting I said we were going to on the subject.
Whatever.
The 18th. We just heard from the rest of them, I didn't want. And then the 11th. And then the 18th is just the certification.
Oh, I know, I've been to that dance, so they certify every single throw the crap.
Yes. You saw the gas.
How was your
Great Jackson and that. Very nice with
Deal with this ordinance 2017 and my copy. Anyone, let's go right into the first social record. Let's start with you, Lisa, go ahead.
Lisa Sluisner,
Deputy Municipal Clerk.
Go ahead, man.
I'm Marilyn Smith.
Christine Wilcox?
Can you identify where your organization, please? Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
All right, sure.
I work at Providence. I'm a surgical technician.
I'm an organic gardener and scientist, and I have worked in pediatric neurology.
Michelle Wilbur, I work for Alaska Community Action on Toxics as Organic Gardening Coordinator.
My name is Emily Klock, and I'm the volunteer coordinator at Alaska Community Action on Toxics.
My name is Jessica Thornton, and I'm the Civic Engagement Coordinator for Alaska Community Action on Toxics.
Should we let Pam?
Oh, yes, sorry. Pam.
Hi, everyone. This is Linda Miller, with Alaska Community Action on Toxics.
I'm Josh Duran, Park Superintendent. I used to volunteer for Alaska Community Against Toxins.
I'm Sherry Holden, Executive Director of Anchorage Waterways Council.
Good training, someone.
Tim Steele.
11 school.
Pete Peterson.
I'll be Rick Johnson.
Two of you. You guys identify yourselves.
Stephen Fidel, curious citizen.
Okay.
Rosella Young, Anchorage, the Assembly Council's office.
Yes, you do. Elby, I'll turn time over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to take like maybe 2 minutes or less just to talk a little bit about how this came about. Vice Chair Cheney and I, we were approached by Pamela Smith, who's the Executive Director of Alaska Community Action on Toxics, and asked us to bring something forward. But the way I like to operate, I don't like to just bring things forward. I like to do my own first. I like to bring all the stakeholders to the table and have a document that everybody can work with before we introduce it before the assembly. And so what I did was task Pamela and her organization and several stakeholders, which included folks from Parks and Recreation, Horticulture Division, and some outside folks too. And they spent several weeks, maybe even a month, reviewing the ordinance, going back and forth, making amendments and changes to the ordinance. And as we stand right now, there is consensus on this ordinance. And that's why we're at this point now, where it's before the Rules Committee, so that city members can make some comments, and we can get a presentation from whoever's going to do the presentation to talk about the ordinance from the last community action on toxics. So whoever's going to do that, Mr. Chairman, can invite them to speak.
Who's here to present this?
I believe Pam was going to present for us.
Okay, let's hope the speaker works.
Yep.
Pam, can you lead us through this document?
Yes. I can't hear you very well. I'm hoping that.
We can hear you.
Okay, very good. Very good. Should I go ahead then?
Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Chair Ms. Gray Jackson and Chair of the committee, Mr. Trainey, for this opportunity. I really appreciate the chance to discuss and advance, hopefully, this ordinance. And so Ms. Gray Jackson has asked me to give an introduction to the ordinance. And so I'll walk through it and give some background and justification for it. And then I look forward to any further discussion that we might have in the committee. So basically, the intention of this ordinance is to protect public health, and especially those who are most vulnerable to the harmful health effects of pesticides. And it's our observation that current pesticide registration protocols and regulations under the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and state of Alaska are outdated and not reflective of the latest science. And this leaves gaps in the protection of public health, and especially for children. The ordinance establishes and codifies a positive, healthy approach that focuses on long-term prevention of pests as well as their damage. And the municipality of Anchorage's horticulture program really should be commended for their efforts to minimize the use of pesticides over the past few years. This ordinance codifies and establishes a set of guidelines and procedures that ensure practices are consistently applied through successive administrations and staff. So first of all, I'd like to discuss a little bit about the health concerns. If you have the ordinance in front of you, the first page of whereases essentially address the intention to protect public health. And these whereases are reflective of the tremendous advances in scientific understanding of the effects of pesticides, such as endocrine disrupting chemicals, their harm to the developing brain and immune systems, and their association with certain types of cancers, including pediatric cancers, and the long-term effects on development and reproduction. During early sensitive life stages, exposures can cause permanent brain injury at low levels that would have little or no effect on an adult. During these windows of development, toxic chemical exposures may cause lasting harm to the brain that interfere with the child's ability to reach his or her full potential. Pesticides constitute the largest group of substances that have caused neurological symptoms. At least 100 pesticides on the market are known to affect the brain. Many of these pesticides are aimed at being toxic to insects, usually by targeting their nervous system. But the brain chemistry in humans is actually quite similar. Developing human brains during early development are particularly vulnerable to pesticides. There are 45 pesticides of a class of chemicals called organophosphate pesticides, and most of these are now known to have potential to damage the developing brain and nervous system. And the contribution of these chemicals to these disorders can be prevented, and that's really what this ordinance is all about. Secondly, I'd like to just briefly discuss the framework of regulations that is important to consider, because I think that also provides justification for why we think this ordinance is so important. The Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, also known as FIFRA, regulates the registration, sale, and use of pesticides and is administered by the Environmental Protection Agency. Due to inherent flaws and lack of rigor, weaknesses in the federal law, it is not accurate to assume that it provides adequate protection for public health. And here are some basic reasons why. First of all, toxicity studies that are required for pesticide registration do not include sensitive health-related endpoints, such as neurodevelopmental deficits, endocrine disruption, immune system effects, or chronic diseases, including Parkinson's disease. However, these disease outcomes have been linked with pesticide exposures in the peer-reviewed scientific literature. Most pesticide products are given approval through conditional registration before all the required toxicity tests are completed. So pesticides can remain on the market while the testing and review may not be completed for years, if at all, and with very little public oversight. And under FIFRA, pesticides are only reviewed every 15 years, which leaves a long gap between advancements in scientific understanding and regulatory action. Exposure limits are generally based on data provided by the pesticide manufacturers, and these have not generally been peer-reviewed, and they rely on these for decisions about registrations rather than independent research studies that have been published in respected peer-reviewed and publicly accessible scientific journals. So peer-reviewed science may indicate the need for more protective limits, yet pesticide regulations and labels are stuck in time. The pesticide registration process doesn't require that EPA consider safer alternatives or lower use or exposure levels. The real primary incentive for an industry registrant is to acquire approval for the uses of their product rather than assessment of reduced risk or safer alternatives. Scientific understanding about the health effects of pesticides have led to restrictions or cancellation of registration, although these actions come after decades of harmful use. One current example includes chlorpyrifos, a widely used insecticide that was canceled for many indoor uses in 2001 because studies documented that prenatal and early life exposures are associated with poor birth outcomes and long-term neurodevelopmental harm. And just a note here, at the time, chlorpyrifos was being used extensively in the Anchorage School District prior to this restriction. And then lastly, combinations of pesticide active ingredients are not tested for synergistic or additive effects. And despite the fact that so-called inert ingredients may make up more than 90% of a pesticide formulation, EPA doesn't require disclosure or evaluate the toxicity of these inert ingredients. In fact, the designation as inert is arbitrary given that an inert ingredient does have biological activity of its own. It may be toxic to humans, and it is likely to be chemically active. Despite recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics to include additional critical information on pesticide labels, EPA does not require identification of risks, particular to the concern of health of children. And one recent example to also illustrate the flaws in the regulatory system, this was just in the news a couple of days ago, a recent investigation published and based on documents released by the court revealed that Monsanto had ghostwritten research that was later attributed to academics and indicated that a senior official at the EPA had worked to quash the review of Roundup's main ingredient. This is one of the most widely used herbicides in the country, glyphosate, and was to have been conducted by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So there's just some inherent bias built into the system. Then briefly, at the state level, again, the assumption is that our state and federal laws ensure the safety of the pesticide registration, management, and regulation. And again, I think looking at the state regulations, that is certainly not the case. So in 2013, to make a very long story short, the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation adopted new regulations that eliminate the requirement for a state agency to obtain a permit from DEC to spray herbicides or pesticides on state lands and rights-of-way. This change in the regulation also eliminated the public's right to participate in the decision-making process. The regulatory changes meant that there is now no requirement for the applicator agency to submit a pesticide application to DEC, and DEC therefore relinquishes permitting authority.
Pam, I've got to interrupt you for a minute. Elby's got a comment. Elby?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pamela, thank you very much for the background information, but for the sake of time, would you briefly go over what this ordinance does?
Sure. I'd be glad to. Yeah. We can go through a sectional analysis, absolutely. But I just wanted to say that, just briefly before I do that, that Representative Jonathan Price Tompkins had introduced a bill, HB 53, but that bill was never passed, and that was meant to restore the public process and establish buffer zones, and that's another reason for this ordinance. So I'll move to the sectional analysis.
If you would, ma'am, go to section 1, definitions.
Sure. So section 1 amends section 15.75.020 to add additional definitions, and I'll come back to these definitions as we proceed through the next section.
Fine, ma'am. Go ahead, ma'am.
Section 2. Okay. Section 2 amends Anchorage Municipal Code Chapter 15.75 by adding section 15.75.025. This section essentially establishes a framework and procedures to ensure the safe management of municipal parks and properties while minimizing the use of pesticides. It is intended to set a standard of care that prevents pest problems, fosters healthy conditions that minimize pest problems, and uses pesticides as a last resort. So I'm going to go back now to two of the key definitions. The second one there, allowed pesticides. These are pesticides listed as minimum risk pesticides under FIFRA, the Federal Pesticide Law, or on your organic list established by the USDA. We initially, when we began this ordinance process, and this is kind of a key element of the discussion that has ensued over the past few weeks, we had what we called a negative list, which was a prohibited list of pesticides based on health outcomes. And this was really a mishmash of state, federal, even international lists of things like carcinogenic chemicals established by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, definitions from Ontario, from the European Union, and we just decided that is too onerous for the department to manage and too cumbersome. And so we came up with this positive list, and these are the allowed pesticides that are on just these two lists. So it's relatively simple, and we think it will be much less cumbersome, and I think we did reach agreement through the discussions over the past few weeks on this. So pesticides then will be used only after monitoring indicates that they're needed according to these established guidelines that meet pest management objectives and minimize environmental disturbances, exposures, pesticide residues, and consider human health and safety risks as well as the health and safety of wildlife. There are some provisions for exemptions, and this was a very important topic of discussion also over the past couple of weeks. If non-allowed pesticides are necessary to meet a health or safety standard or pest hazard, such as an invasive species problem or for research purposes, the department director or designee will make a written determination of exception, approving the application and identifying the circumstances and failure of the non-pesticide means of control. And this is a provision, this next one is an exemption that was requested by the Municipal Horticulture Department for the use of a single application aerosol cans against biting or stinging insects when applied according to label directions. A written determination from the department director is not required. And we really conceded on this point because it was a point of concern for both emergency situations and liability, and so we definitely reached agreement on that point. And then I just want to address one other thing in section 2. This is actually near the top, the first paragraph that reads, no person or entity shall apply pesticides within municipal parks, public lands, green belts, municipal properties that are open to the public or rights of way, and so on. I just want to address the clause open to the public because this was another point of discussion over the past few weeks. We initially wanted to leave that out because we felt the open to the public, because we felt that it's necessary not only to protect the health of the public, but also regard this as a worker health issue, and also to consider that plants that might be grown in a greenhouse would be placed out into public areas and have residues. But this is again a point that was a difficult one for the municipal horticulture program, but we just wanted to flag it as an important issue to consider. So I'll move on, and the last section, so basically Section 2 walks through all the preventative measures. It establishes the exemptions and looks at some of the specific preventative and integrated pest management approaches to address pest issues should they arise, including cultural, mechanical, and biological methods. And then quickly moving on to Section 3, this is basically the notification section that requires posting in certain conditions where pesticides would actually be applied. That is the non-allowed pesticides. So it establishes the requirements for notification, the distances, and the hours required to post 48 hours in advance and 72 hours post-application. And then it also specifies requirements for the signage. And I think those are really the key provisions. Part C of Section 3, and this was something that was also requested by the Horticulture Department. The department will publish a list of any approved application of non-allowed pesticides within municipal parks, public lands, green belts, or rights-of-way during the previous year, and that information will be publicly available through the municipal open data portal. So that's a quick dash through the ordinance, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions. And I know there are people in the room who also have a lot of expertise and who would like to speak on this issue.
Thank you, Pam.
So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a couple more comments. As you can see from the CC's on all the emails, there were a lot of people involved. There were folks from the state that were involved, municipality, Park and Recreation Department, in addition to the health department. Also, one of Mr. Cherry's constituent of mine, Tim Taylor, was involved. And I've also asked Rose to provide a summary of economic effects, at least before the public hearing. And it was also, the original ordinance was drafted by our attorney, Julia Tucker, and she also had the opportunity to review the final document. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Evans?
Yeah, I don't know if there's anybody in the room that can answer the question. It seems like the concern came from the horticultural department. But with respect to the inclusion of open to the public, the limitation on that, does anybody know what the objection of the horticultural department was that caused you guys to do that?
The reason is the greenhouses are not open to the public. So that provides opportunity to use the appropriate pesticides in that closed structure.
I guess I'm just trying to understand that. I mean, are they saying that they want to use what are, I guess, under just non-allowed pesticides in the greenhouses, and the reason they're justifying that is because it's not open to the public, so it's not causing the health concerns?
I unfortunately can't answer that accurately because I did not participate in this, and the two that did are out of town. So I could defer to Pam, since the others that did participate in that, and have explained horticulture's stance on that topic.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Evans, I was in the meeting with Steve from Horticulture, and the concern is there is no exclusionary use of pesticides allowed in this for purely ornamental reasons or aesthetic reasons, and yet everything done in those greenhouses is for aesthetic reasons. And they feel that those are very important, and very rarely they have very good practices, but every 3 years or so, to prevent a complete loss of the plants to be planted out around Anchorage, they feel they need to use one of the non-allowed pesticides, and then they feel the danger to the public is minimized because it would only be any residues left. The actual spraying would be within an enclosed, not open to the public space. So that's we would love to see the ordinance not have that exclusion organizationally, but that's a compromise we've made through discussion with horticulture.
It just seems like that reason could be addressed as one of the exemptions for using non-allowed pesticides in the first place. We do build in some exemptions here. It seems like that's a rare instance according to them. It seems like it'd be better addressed saying, okay, when those situations where you have to do it for ornamental reasons or whatever, you can use it with all these other qualifiers. But generally, you would, in those places, even if it did allow public access, would have to use the allowed substances. Was that discussed with them at all, or?
The language utilized was their specified, they specified that language change to the draft. So I agree there might be a slicker way to do it that, currently they are using best practices and their own integrated pest management sort of internal policies, and we would love to see that continue because basically we want to codify the good work that the Muni is currently doing. So if there was a better way to word that so that they still get their last ditch abilities and that makes them happy without opening a wide loophole, that would be great.
Because practices can change with different administrations and down the road, so I think we'll look into it and see what we do with that.
Yeah, so have they signed off on this compromise measure?
Yeah, the final, thank you. The final email from Steve was that they were happy with the draft as is.
Computers, any questions? Okay. Mr. Jackson?
Nothing, Mr. Chairman.
Comments from anybody? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I just got involved in this about a week ago, and I've been doing research on it. Obviously, we don't like pesticide residue and that sort of thing in the waterways because of the impact on plants and animals, background vertebrates, fish, and things like that. I don't quite understand the chain of command. It seems like Parks and Rec is being called out here as sort of the pinnacle person here. There are other agencies in the municipality. There's street maintenance. There's AWU. I checked with AWU, and they said they don't do any herbicides around their hydrants. You have People Mover. There are just a lot of different places that pesticides could be used. One of the things that has happened in my neighborhood and your neighborhood was when Tim Stollard wanted to spray and reduce some of the Prentice Patis right on Campbell Creek there 2 years ago, and he is a contractor with the Anchorage Parks Foundation, which is independent from the municipality. It's a nonprofit organization. And I did we opposed this, you recall, in our community council. And Tim put out a poster a while ago, it's 2013, that says that herbicide use on municipality of Anchorage-owned lands does not require an Alaska DEC permit, facilitating this essential weed management tool. UAF Cooperative Extension was consulted on appropriate herbicides for various sites and species. Orange hawkweed was treated at 2 sites, and Canada thistle was treated at 3 sites using milestone, and European bird cherries trees were cut and their stumps painted with Aquamaster glyphosate at 2 high priority sites. So who gives the Park Foundation and Tim Stollard, if it's not part of the municipality, how is this going to be done?
Just by my reading of it, it prohibits anyone, which would include Parks Department or anybody, from applying pesticides to municipal lands that are covered by this. So I think that any individual or anybody within the municipality or outside of it would be prohibited from doing this.
On municipal land.
Yeah, well, that's all this covers.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what she's probably going to say.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So there are exemptions and invasive species with environmental potential for environmental damage is an exemption that can be signed off on by the Department, Health and Human Services Department head. But until that procedure has been gone through and it's a last resort and done under the provisions of this ordinance, then in fact nobody.
It seems like it got very casual, and nobody wanted to approve it, and then it went to the community councils, and I think along Chester Creek and then mine, Campbell Park, if you can get the people who live there to sign off that it's okay. So that doesn't seem very careful in my opinion. So hopefully,
Stop that. Doesn't have to have city permission to use these methods.
they would just have to go to your meeting.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So I like the fact that that's going to strengthen that. And just one other comment I should make, that I worked with with Watershed Management Services, Christy Bishopberger from the municipality, and we're doing outreach on runoff, which is one of the primary ways that all this ends up in our waterways. They did studies on 3 lakes, Lake Otis, Hideaway Lake, and Little Campbell Lake, as part of their APD's Alaska Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. And in 2011, they tested for 2,4-D at Harborville. 2011, none was detected. These 3 lakes, one of them is entirely not surrounded. Little Campbell Creek is not surrounded by any homes. Hideaway Lake is kind of partially residential, and Lake Otis is mostly residential. 2013, there were detectable levels of 2,4-D in Hideaway Lake and Lake Otis. Not that they exceeded any standards, but it was the first time they've ever found. Pardon?
First time they detected them?
Yes, first time they've ever detected them. But then again, in 2016, they were tested again, and they're not there. But these would be private. These are not municipal applications. So we need to kind of control public.
I think we could be good examples and advocate for responsible use, because there are a lot of streams that have fishing, that whether they do or not, there's private property in the pipe, and so people use it for their own property. We don't want to outlaw it, but it would be tough to do that. But we certainly advocate get the information out, as we all do.
That's a good solution.
Take over where Fish Creek goes, underground and above ground, it's a mess. They could get polluted by just anybody.
Right.
I don't even know they're doing that to it. Any other comments? We've got our meeting in just a minute. Just great job.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank everybody for being here and for all the work that everyone did. Come to consensus, working with the authorities. And based on the good job that you've done, we're going to introduce this. We're going to wait and say that it's too late for the agenda.
Production on our next meeting Tuesday and then action.
Can I finish, Mr. Chairman?
No, I'm going to cut your comments down to 2 minutes. She likes to use flowery words.
Anyway, introduction on Tuesday, you don't have to be there, and the public hearing will be on Tuesday. And I want to thank my colleagues for doing this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any comments from the public on this item? If not, this meeting's over. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.